I'll start my little spiel at the beginning, and then we'll go from there. How does that sound?
Good. I'm still catching up
Good.
where people are from. Singapore, Shropshire. Sorry, my misreading.
Chicago, Yorkshire. No rain in Manchester. Lucky old you, Fiona.
Marseille sounds lovely. Chicago. So some earlier days.
Okay.
South Africa, same timeline. Lovely.
Right, I'm going to make a start. So thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this Ask the Analyst session for the 2024 Fosway 9 grid for Cloud HR. I'm John Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I will be your host for today's session. Can we have the first slide, please? Founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR, talent and learning practices. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and corporates, as well as independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary. How's our slides going in the background? Okay. I've got plenty to say on this. So just to say that before we launch into the main body of the session, let me also take this moment to tell you about Fosway Corporate Membership. It's one of our newest services. We will be mentioning it at the end as well. But for now, the Fosway Corporate Membership is an invite-only network for HR learning and talent leaders, offering privileged access to the data and insights that sit behind the 9 grid and realities research, and also automatic booking privileges for our roundtable program, and the opportunity to book exclusive time with a member of our analyst team as well. And more besides this, do contact us if you're interested in learning more. I think we're having technical issues with the slides, so I'm going to defer to David to say thank you very much for stepping in for this Ask the Analyst session today, by the way.
Yeah, pleasure. And I didn't recognize myself. So yeah, it's always interesting to see a photo of yourself from a couple of years back. But thanks everyone for joining us. And I'll try to remember what I was supposed to say without the slides. It's always a little bit of a tricky one. What I was going to say is I think oh, here we go. Thanks Ian in the background for making that happen. So first of all, Geoff, just to say, it's important that you put your chat, if you've got any questions as we go through, do put them in the chat. So if you haven't had to sort of tried it out by saying hello to everyone or noticing the slides are a little bit out of sync with our voices, that's just to keep us on our toes. But put them in the chat. There is an opportunity to apply to everyone. You don't have to put it directly to the panelists unless you want a secret question to come at us and remain anonymous. It says play nicely, but we're used to the rough and tumble anyway. So ask whatever questions that you feel are relevant and are interest to you. And what we'll do is we'll start with a little bit of introductory content and take you through that, if that's all right, John. And yeah, you can ask questions at any time.
Yeah, just to give you your full introductions, Sven, you are the lead analyst on the Cloud HR research, and David, Chief Insights Officer, are going to be talking through our latest 9 grids. So this is where we hand over and give a bit of context before we go into the questions proper. So yes, David, over to you to talk about the 9 grid and the research.
Right then. So in terms of the 9 grids, we've been working on the 9 grids, I think, as a concept for about 16, 17 years. And the one that we created for Cloud HR is probably in its 10th iteration, at least its 9th iteration. So it's something that we've been profiling for a very long time. And we take these very seriously. The depth and breadth of input that we get is quite astonishing sometimes in the amount of functional insight that we get and the range of conversations that we have with large enterprise scale corporates. Some of those come from our research network roundtables. We often do sort of virtual half-hour reference calls with leading organizations to understand how the solutions that they're using are working for them. We have lots of sort of corporate and advisory work that we also do that supports our research process, and we use our polls and surveys, the HR realities, to inform our view. and a structured data capture, which is quite an onerous task for the organizations that we profile, the vendors that we profile to complete. There's a lot of detail that we go into across the employee life cycle. And we also do quite a lot of independent briefings and demonstrations. So not only do we get the input from customers, we get surveys from customers, but we also look at the solutions and compare them ourselves in terms of the experience that they create or enable. And we also go along to vendors' events and other corporate activities and events just to understand where the industry is heading overall, along, as I said, with the core customer reference process. So we take a qualitative view, we take a quantitative view, we get a voice from the vendors and also a voice from the corporates, and try and sit in the middle and get an understanding of who's the most reliable witness, what have they got to say, and does it add up in terms of what we see when we compare to others. So it's a very rounded view. The criteria for inclusion in the grid is very much that they're relevant to large enterprise, typically EMEA headquartered corporates. So it tends to be organizations that are 5,000 employees and above. So some of the solutions we look at are a little bit sort of maybe more mid-sized enterprise focused, but most of the solutions are really targeted or are a viable option for larger enterprise, global, complex organizations. And typically the reason for including those is because we have some insight pretty much from our corporate research network that they are relevant choices, that they're either considering using them, are using them, or have used them and replaced them with something else. So that pretty much is the sort of approach. And nobody pays to be on our 9 grid. Nobody pays us to be on the grid. And they can't decline to be included. If we think they're relevant, we've got sufficient input from customers to say, this is a good view, then we add that in and we take it from there. The primary viewpoint about the reasons for the placement is very much customer-led. So it's what customers and buyers say about their providers and how they perform. The vendor input that we use is a secondary input, and that just helps us get a sense of sort of leveling the playing field. If things have gone wrong, we're always trying to understand whose fault it was, and sometimes it's not the fault of the vendor. So we're always trying to get a balanced view. But we're trying to use the vendor input not only to give us a direct experience of what the solution feels like, but also their sense of strategy and what's on their roadmap and where things are going in the future. But it's a lot based around the customer insight, hard data from surveys and conversations. So we're really getting an understanding of how people are executing and the ability of different providers to make a difference for their customers. Please, when you look at the report, everybody looks at the front page and looks at the grid and the positionings there. That's part of the story, but I would strongly recommend reading through the trends report and the solutions trends element of the report overall, and get an understanding of how to interpret the diagram that we create, the 9 grid that we create as well. There's some really great insight inside that report, giving an indication of how the market's performing, what's hot in terms of the solution trends, but also how to read the charts themselves and what goes into the sort of background of the criteria that we use to assess providers. So do have a look through that. What we've added this year in terms of the report is some specific things around trajectory. So you've got some interesting sort of standardized language that we started to apply around the positioning of vendors within a cell, and also a heightened view around the total cost of ownership, TCO. We've included that to give you a better lens in the table of contents, really to give you a sense of where different providers play. So do download the reports and make the most of them. But Sven, Cloud HR is your bag, and a fascinating part of the marketplace. Over to you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so obviously the functional model for Cloud HR is a big one. It's our biggest, probably by number of line items that's inside of it. We basically think of it as in 3 big categories: people operations and people management, which are the inner 6 dark blue hexagons on this slide. And then this is augmented, obviously, by talent and people success. So anything from recruitment and onboarding into then obviously performance, learning, compensation, talent, and so on. So those kind of areas are part of the model. The catalog of items is growing year over year, this year in particularly, and also last year, actually, we have already embedded quite a few additional AI features and functionalities into the model that not many vendors 2 years back were able to kind of cross out a lot of the boxes. But there was interest, obviously, from corporates in those kind of areas and topics. And the model obviously helps us also in our private advisory work to give corporates an understanding of what are the hot topics, what are the things they should be looking at moving forward into the future. So obviously, here we will only look at the high level view, but if you want to have a deeper dive into what that looks like, obviously, feel free to reach out. We're happy to explain that in greater depth and detail. And this obviously is then part of one dimension of the grid. The potential dimension is one that looks at the functionality, the scope, and the sophistication, which is on the next slide, where we actually then have the 2024 9 grid, the image that you might have already seen in one of the LinkedIn posts or whatever, or hopefully also downloaded the full report, as David said, from the website. I think what's really important this year, you know, the European economy is probably not in the best shape in some areas. Germany in particular is struggling, but all across the different countries that has weighted quite heavily on corporate budgets and also has impacted the vendors, obviously, across the last year. So there was still growth rates from, you know, many providers exceeding 20% on average, but on average they have plateaued, right? So and even declined, especially in the large enterprise space. The maturity of the cloud HR solutions is higher. Budget pressures have forced companies to scrutinize their large projects more carefully. Generally, there was a momentum to consolidate further into the HR main kind of solution that is at the center of the HR ecosystem, if you like. And many of the vendors have pivoted around that. From a corporate perspective, obviously, a lot of operations teams are also under pressure to improve both their organizational performance, but also the HR performance. And more are now exploring AI as a strategic response. We found during the research that HR's confidence in AI is definitely increasing. The early adopters from a company perspective have started to report gains in productivity and efficiency. And the areas where they have started to see that the most is talent acquisition, learning development, skills, analytics, and workforce intelligence. So I think that is definitely where we see AI as a catalyst for HR efficiency. And obviously, we are all reading the news, automation is coming. And I think for a HR solution, human in the loop is still a very essential concept. Over half of HR professionals believe that a human touch is needed across all HR processes. So like in every process, but a notable proportion is also able or willing to kind of explore or experiment at least with more autonomous AI solutions. Obviously not in areas where judgment, empathy, ethical considerations are really necessary. So there are obviously areas where, you know, it makes maybe more sense than in others. And this is certainly something where a lot of the vendors are investing in, particularly at the more innovative providers are looking at that in particular. From an employee experience perspective, the next bullet point here talks about, obviously, that companies have invested heavy in their HR systems, yet the satisfaction with employee experience is still stubbornly low and is still a big driver for system changes and improvements. The reality is that many solutions still fall short in terms of employee experience. AI is giving a little bit of that as well, but I think the biggest driver is in, to stay competitive, organizations must invest in personalized connected experiences and break those silos apart between the different functions within HR to create more connected and deeper personalized experiences. And it's obviously about the outcomes. It's not a click on the user interface that people are making. So it's a much bigger kind of picture that companies need to look at that. In terms of AI solutions, we found that a lot of vendors are, obviously investing a lot in getting the first kind of scenarios out there to their customers, into the solutions. And that is a task, which obviously takes work and is all good. But many then just start to count the number of use cases and say, oh, we have 50 or 93 or whatever the number might be that they have infused generative AI nowadays. But I think from a corporate perspective, the big difference to how the vendors communicate about it is that the corporate buyers are looking for solutions for holistic pieces of functionality that companies are really looking at least for one particular persona to have all the use cases and not just this piecemeal approach of like having one feature for that persona, one feature for that persona. So from that perspective, definitely more interest from the buyers. In all of our roundtables and all of our private advisory work, AI is a big topic. David, to your question in the chat, so there is a bit of a difference in between like the speed of innovation between providers. So you actually need to look at every specific vendor individually where they are. In the mid band, in the lower band, there's a few who are a little bit slower than maybe some others. So definitely in terms of the trajectory that David mentioned, the ones that are maybe a bit more at the top end of the zone are usually the ones that are innovating faster and accelerating, at least towards themselves and the market as a whole. But generally, the market innovation is relatively high anyway. Yeah, so David, any comments, remarks from your side on this?
I suppose I have a question. I've got every time we talk about the 9 grids and the things that are happening, it always prompts a question. And I was thinking in terms of the areas of focus, especially around AI, that you're seeing and the progress that's being made within the cloud HR suites. Are there any particular HR processes that you're seeing more acceleration around than others? Things that you think actually there's a bigger momentum around that sort of functionality being driven by AI?
Yeah, I think HR service delivery is getting a lot of
Right.
innovation from the HR, people operations, people management
Yeah.
area. There's a general assistant, general co-pilot kind of notion in the market for sure as well that helps with maybe answering questions that employees or managers or executives might have. So it's very persona specific answers that they would get based off of maybe some libraries of documents that can also then be uploaded, policy documents, and so on. So that definitely is something where this is an area. I mean, generative AI obviously also is in recruitment used a lot, and obviously there's specific AI. So I don't think we want to narrow it down to generative AI only. So the innovation is equally high in skills, in workforce intelligence, in those kind of areas that are really important too. We even see it in payroll where it's helping with, the stupid checks that you have to do every month over and over to actually be a bit smarter and more intelligent about that. And in workforce management, helping to, approve shifts, move workflows along a little bit faster. So it's really in all areas, but obviously a lot of the hype currently is around generative AI and those kind of areas that it influences.
But it's interesting, isn't it? That sense that it's bubbling up in very focused use cases within specific disciplines. So I'm thinking about those inquiries using maybe a co-pilot to ask a question of how many days paternity leave am I allowed to take, and or maternity leave, depending on background, and getting maybe specific answers. Are people worried about hallucinations as part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is still one, particularly in Europe. The UK is probably a bit further ahead of France, Germany, which are a bit more hesitant, I would say, a bit more onerous in their evaluation of things, and come with a big book that legal has written, and vendors need to go through that. So I think from that perspective, definitely there is fear of hallucination. That is also one of the bigger blockers. So vendors are finding now some solutions like retrieval augmented generation to actually mitigate the risks, but also some vendors have maybe been, coming back to the service delivery case, have been more careful and maybe only drafting a response to an HR service agent rather than giving the answer directly, because the question that you just asked was probably an easy one to answer if I have the data right, and we wouldn't necessarily have to have had a sophisticated AI to do this. But if you have two children and are living abroad and you are interested in some benefits kind of question, then obviously the eyes that the AI is standing on is maybe already a little bit thinner, or quite a lot thinner. So there, obviously, this human in the loop, this human oversight concept is, I think, much more relevant. And yeah, the different approaches by different vendors, for sure. So that is also part of how you need to look at this as a buyer, is you need to really go down into the engine room and look at what the companies have implemented and how they have implemented it.
But that sounds complicated, right? And that does bamboozle me, thinking about how you really assess the AI that's being prompted to you as a buyer. Are there things that you're starting to see buyer organizations, either IT teams, get into that help them validate? I know we talk about explainable AI and things like that.
Yeah, so explainability is a big factor in it, to make it easier to, obviously, for the buyers to accept it. Usually there's a team of HR, IT, legal that is looking at these AI solutions. There is now also actually specific solutions, software solutions out there that track what AI is a company using and what kind of systems within HR, within other finance and business domains as well, and even tracking that and, tracking how vendors and the company as a user themselves ensure that they're not introducing additional bias by using it, I think is an important one, where compliance is, obviously compliance requirements are increasing, and vendors are putting more scrutiny into external third-party audits and being able to pull those out of the drawer, because the questions that corporates pose them are significant. Usually, and this is another important thing, companies find the process of evaluating that quite a labor-intensive one. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, because so many people are involved. So typically that is an argument to put more AI into one solution, if you like. So for bigger solutions to actually excel a little bit at that. So I think that is what some of the vendors on here are also using in terms of an argument for their kind of side as well, if that makes sense.
But maybe a tough thing for mid-sized and smaller organizations to go through that assessment. So maybe it's almost becomes the
I mean,
domain
and
of
this is why
larger
you
ones.
can obviously accelerate your buying process significantly by talking to experts and analysts that will help you on that journey, right? Because the variety of options that exists are significant. The speed of change is very significant. What was true 3 months ago, 6 months ago is definitely no longer true today, as the rate of innovation is so high. Also, our advice to corporates who are looking to implement AI is, don't think of it as a one-off project. Think of it as a journey that, where you are now maybe taking in 2024 or early 25, like the first steps. But certainly, it is a journey that will take multiple years as the things will get smarter and smarter and smarter.
It's interesting. I'm picking out Miles's question about, do you think employees also believe a human touch is needed across all HR processes and executives too? That sense of human in the loop. Again, we know we tend to speak more directly to HR professionals, not necessarily the employees when we do our reference calls, but do you have a sense of an answer around that? Is it also the employees want a human touch?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We all, being employees ourselves, appreciate obviously being recognized, having real human interactions. So I think that is a very important notion to look at. Where do you want to automate and where do you
Yeah.
use cases that HR is looking to adopt are the ones where maybe less interaction to the employee is involved. It's more the back office kind of functions that can maybe be automated a bit more, which then frees time, obviously, to interact with the employee a bit more extensively. This is not to say that companies are not looking at also obviously using chatbots or large language models, co-pilots, however you want to call them, however they call them, to deflect some of the requests that employees have.
Yeah.
And I think as a general option, that is always good, but certainly companies need to think about where human in the loop, where human touch is really, really important to them, where it makes a difference. Because it has so many implications that we don't yet fully understand. So experimenting with it, giving choice maybe is also an option so that the employee can choose which path they would like to go is maybe a good way to think about it in 2024, 25 still, before maybe some areas are then maybe a bit more automated in the future, if that makes sense.
John, I know, John, that you had some questions that were submitted before we did the round table while we wait for others to put their own question in. And I've got loads of questions. I can keep going forever, to be honest, but I don't want to hog the show, right?
Yeah, okay. We had a few questions from Dirk Schuerholz, project director at CGID, who's got questions around some AI issues, of which there are many, obviously. We've touched on quite a lot of them already, or elements anyway, about assessing the quality and accuracy of corporate data that models are based on. That was one of his questions. Have you got any comments around that, Sven?
Yeah, so I think obviously a lot of the vendors' efforts to deploy AI into their solutions is around making sure that corporate data is protected at all times from the general AI models not being able to learn from those, right? So that was a big part of like what happened in maybe 2023, that the vendors needed to kind of figure out how to do that the best way. Most of them have figured that out now. And obviously now it is time to put more of the corporate policies, corporate documents, and expose that to the large language model so that you can actually, leverage it, these insights in a conversational interface. So from that perspective, vendors have also provided those facilities, and from a corporate perspective, that obviously means they need to be in a position to provide these documents to the vendors if they want, obviously, AI to be using them. So from that perspective, many companies have started to collect all the policies that they have globally, and then obviously had to maybe make sure that everything was up to date and correct and everything, so that it was actually something that the AI could use. It's actually also the same has been happening behind the scenes on the vendor side, because obviously they have a deep understanding of maybe what legal changes have happened in, every country to payroll on the 1st of January or to other legislation. Obviously, that is really key and critical information that you need to get to one central location. Some of the vendors actually who have maybe acquired solutions in the past and have integrated them and maybe put an overlay on it, have actually found it a little bit harder to build AI across these kind of solutions. So they have typically found a way to build something atop that then connects into those solutions, has access to the data, and that is then where the AI actually sits. That comes with other, obviously, some challenging implications, as the report speaks to about that a little bit as well. But I think it's definitely something where a good first step is to actually look at collecting all those documents together, and so that you can actually expose the AI to them.
David P, anything to add?
No, that'd be a great answer.
Okay, we'll move on
To be
to
honest.
Samantha Williams. Thank you very much for your question. Are solutions looking into AI to do predictive reporting, for example, for succession planning, Sven?
Predictive reporting for succession planning. So obviously that is a question that has to do with experience and skills, and the future needs of the role, and also obviously the leadership capabilities. There are quite a lot of solutions that focus on skills and matching employees or candidates to roles and jobs as is. There are also some solutions who look at the future and infuse new skills into that. So those solutions are the ones that I would look to and recommend in that case. Yeah, David, do you want to add to that?
It's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah. Because I think when you think about the human in the loop, that a point when you make recommendations, you must be able to transparently explain why you made that recommendation for that succession. So I think you will find solutions, and I'm not aware of many that have started to focus on that particular part of the story. That say, oh, we provide evidence gathering and start to stack rank your successors. I've not come across solutions that have started to do that yet. But exactly what Sven was saying, this sense of actually, can we provide recommendation engines for individuals based on their aspirations of things that they might do to make them more employable within a particular role? So it becomes an item of agency and activation of individuals rather than an evaluation, a stack ranking, and a gateway to individuals. I think we're seeing much more of that career enablement and career connection than we are seeing almost candidate ranking. Although having said that, I'm sure if you looked at some of the internal mobility functionality and talent pooling functionality, you might start to see some of the answers around who might be a good fit start to become part of that story. But explicitly for succession planning, I haven't come across any. Again, if anybody's seen some, please put them in the chat because we're going to have a look at them after. But we've been profiling quite a few, and we've been looking at solutions from around the talent and people success language, which would be released tomorrow, if I'm allowed to make that bold announcement. So maybe have a look in there and see what's coming in there. But I have not seen anything specifically predictive succession planning. This more tends to be talent pools and talent recommendations and suggestions for internal mobility for individuals as much as the organisation.
Thank you,
That's a
David.
reasonable answer. Thank you.
Yeah, very much so. We'll have another one of Dirk's questions, I think, actually. The impact on IT when AI systems scale. Are there any comments around that, Sven? You're smiling.
Yeah, so this is obviously a big question. Who's going to pay for it all, right? If you see the stock price of NVIDIA and all the investment that the companies are making into the large language models, obviously someone has to pay the price for it, right? So interestingly, the customers don't necessarily expect to pay for AI features as they see it as a general improvement as per their SaaS license. There are obviously vendors who disagree. There are, can't name names, but there's a few companies who've been test driving generative AI large language models as part of the HCM solutions who have been shy of moving it into production because they weren't entirely sure what the end state of the pricing model would look like that the vendor applies, and they were a little bit afraid that there might be an invoice coming their way which they cannot control anymore. So I think this is obviously one of the big things in the industry currently. Who's covering the costs? Obviously, they are going down. The prices per token are reducing, and there are cheaper models. There are obviously open source models out there that vendors are employing to control some of the costs. So it depends, obviously, on then the ability of the vendor to support those kind of models. But certainly it is a big question where IT is drilling in quite deep into understanding what corporates, what vendors are doing. And obviously we have done that as well. And the TCO information on the grid is up to date. So you can look at that holistically, and that will involve also the pricing for artificial intelligence if any additional fees are asked for by vendors.
It's interesting you say that, Sven. Just last week, I was speaking with David Wilson, and he was reflecting on a conversation he'd had with a buying organization where their existing cloud HR provider had said it would cost them a third of their cloud HR license to also add in a particular AI-enabled succession planning function. And it was like, what? How much? How am I going to pay for that? Where's that budget line going to come from? What's my business case? And I think, yeah, everybody's still finding their way. I think buyers have to be careful potentially of being sat down when they get confronted with some of the costs that providers may want to charge them. And it'd be interesting to see where this takes us. There's trillions of dollars being plowed into AI. The business outcomes for everybody still seem to be a little bit open-ended on who's paying for that and who's going to survive the investment as well. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a question from Miles, which I think you were going to follow up on as well, David. What are the main reasons for customers to change vendors? And specifically more about this space, or is it quite rare for that reason, Sven?
That's a great question, Miles.
Yeah, obviously the changing your core HR system that sits at the center of everything is not an easy undertaking. For large enterprises, most companies will have 100, 200, even 700 integrations. And it's a really big challenge. So from that perspective, companies obviously don't take those decisions lightly. There's obviously more scrutiny on business cases. It is still happening, definitely. And there's still, you would be surprised in 2024 to hear how many people are still using some on-premise kind of technology and are not yet in the cloud, or those kind of things. And obviously I spoke about employee experience as one of the big drivers for those kind of changes. And for sure, there is always a few companies out there looking for something new. Typically, it's after the second to third renewal point, that they will start to look really more seriously at the question: are we still well suited with the current provider? This is obviously a little bit different in the lower size companies. Smaller companies, obviously, as they grow, might discover that they have maybe outgrown their current HR system because maybe the security configuration or the reporting isn't working anymore so well for them. So in that case, obviously, they might buy another solution that is a bit more tailored, a bit more sophisticated for the new kind of setup. Maybe they've acquired another business or something. Those kind of things are still happening, and a lot of the vendors also who have historically worked a lot with the large enterprises actually are moving down into this mid-enterprise segment for sure. So there's a strong motion, and the competitiveness in that space in particular is increasing significantly. I hope I answered the question. David, do you want to add anything?
Answer. It's a great answer. And just to reiterate the bit about our HR realities research always points at not the relationship with the vendor being the thing that triggers people to move, but the quality of the employee experience always comes out as number one. And that's been consistent over the last 8-9 years. So it is, how good is the system experience for my employees, which is quite a refreshing message to take away. But equally, it doesn't happen that often, and I think sorts of triggers that mean that people do look at replacing their cloud HR platform becomes a little bit more of a topic for conversation and real intent, rather than just trying to become a negotiating point for renewal, which is one of the things people do. They go to market to try and find out if they can get a cheaper quote from a competitor without really wanting to move, even just to try and create a bit more of a competitive bid. The only other real catalyst that we tend to see is around merger and acquisition, when you get two organizations coming together. And usually that can be quite a pointed point of, actually, let's just put the whole thing up for bid and see if we get some really good cost savings. And I think what that other thing I'd just like to stress is the thing about the employee experience. That is what also drives the fragmentation of the marketplace. When people have a Workday, an Oracle, an SAP, a UKG, the thing that they'll look to implement are maybe some niche solutions, because the employee experience, say around employee listening, maybe it's learning, maybe it's around skills, isn't strong enough to enable them to feel as though they can move in a more agile way and get the benefits faster for their organization. And that usually drives some fragmentation. And the only other thing that drive it is if they've got a fragmented 3 or 4 cloud HR platforms anyway, or HR platforms, and people looking to consolidate. So there's a few pressures in play.
David, I think you had a follow-up question to that, but it plays seemingly quite nicely into Kitty's question. I do apologise if I pronounced your name wrong. Given the variety of applications used for learning, management and talent review and recruiting, each with its own skills taxonomy, how are companies managing to create a uniform language across all these platforms?
That is, I tell you, that is an absolute doozy of a question, right? That is if there was a gold award for questions so far, Gertie, that was the best, honestly, because I think what I've seen from looking at talent people's success, and I'm sure Sven will offer his view on this as well, there has not been a strong sense of interoperability and connectivity of skills across platforms, across the different silos, be that talent acquisition, learning, talent mobility, name it, performance. There's been very little willingness to concede the ground that actually my system owns skills. And they all take a little bit of the drawbridge is down. No, the drawbridge is up. That's right. Word portcullis is down. Keeps everybody else out, right? And that's what we started to see. And I think some of the richness of how you manage skills taxonomies is stronger in some of the niche players. You get some players who are claiming or taking a place of being middleware to say, we'll do the skills and make that seamless for everybody else. But even that interoperability is weak, and it stifles innovation in organizations a little bit, and it's a real challenge. Sven, maybe from the sort of cloud HR
from the
specifics.
HCM suite providers perspective, obviously they want to own this piece, and have obviously in the past been maybe struggling a little bit with it. So have over the past years actually introduced APIs, interfaces that companies can use actually to exchange skills, data, and taxonomies. The tricky thing is that with a taxonomy, you obviously have a lot of intelligence in the relationships between skills, And obviously that doesn't reflect from one vendor to the other. I think this is one of the particular problems that kind of is difficult to solve. There's a few vendors who've specialized on doing this. They are not on this 9-grid necessarily, but provide a bit of more of this middleware layer that can connect and make sense of that. As David said, this will be on the Talent and People Success 9-grid, which is launching this week. And yeah, so, but it's definitely one of those very significant issues where a lot of companies are looking to consolidate more, particularly for this reason. But the question then is the skills taxonomy in your cloud HCM solution good enough to actually allow you to do that? And a lot of companies are answering that question currently with, we are still retaining specialist providers to help us with at least aspects of that.
But it's a really challenging story. And I think even those who were early entrants into things like skills and talent marketplaces, people who maybe adopted solutions like the Gloats, the Fuel 50s, the 365 Talents and Tech Wolves and the NeoBrains of the world, who've sort of almost gone down the route of, we want to accelerate what we're doing around skills by using a niche player, that they are also coming up to the internal IT hurdle, which when you get to the end of your 3-year term or 4-year term, whatever you signed up with your skills provider, there's been a lot of promises made by SAP, Workday, Oracle about how their solutions will work in a year's time. And there seems to be a bit of a pinch point coming between, can some of these solutions survive some of the pressures from the IT team to say, well, if we've got 2 solutions doing the same thing, isn't SAP or Workday good enough now? So, and I don't want to renew 2 providers where we can consolidate into one. What's the reasons not to use? And I think there's going to be that sort of growing pressure and to try and bring consolidation into the marketplace as the promises from the cloud HR providers continue to grow. So it's a difficult one. It really is not an easy thing to work your way through. You just need to know that you've delivered value in the time frame that you wanted to, in whatever process you wanted to enable. So be that internal ability, etc. Yeah, that's a great question about taxonomies.
Thank you, David. Another one from Samantha, based on your comments that moving vendor is led by employee experience. Are you seeing an increase in engagement platforms being the front face with the HR solution more in the background? Sven, is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, so obviously understanding employee sentiment, it has been since the pandemic a big trend that a lot of companies have invested in. Obviously people being locked down and everything, right? So that was quite important. We are now seeing it also in frontline workforce heavy organizations as well, that understanding employee sentiment for the operational day-to-day work is really quite important. And a lot of the vendors actually have invested over the past years into providing solutions specifically for frontline workers on that notion. So it is definitely something where corporates are putting more attention onto that subject when they make a selection. Again, on the Cloud HR 9-grid, we don't necessarily cover all the specialists for employee engagement. Here we obviously have solutions, HCM solutions that have capability in that space, and a lot of them have, you know, reasonably good capability or really excellent capability in that area. But there are certainly also, if in case your current provider doesn't have a module, again, the Talent and People Success 9-grid, David, comes out this week. So maybe you want to add in a little bit more.
I'd back everything that you said, Sven, because I think it's made some really good observations there. And what I would probably pick out around the sort of sense of the employee experience is, quite often the employee experience is not driven by HR directly, it's driven by the practices of managers. So when you're thinking about employee listening and employee engagement, actually it's the ability for those managers to make have better conversations with their people around performance, their engagement, their aspirations in the future around career. Actually, it's almost HR one step removed, because even if they put in the processes, if the manager doesn't bring that to life and doesn't allow the employee to live that experience, then it still sort of falters. So sort of thinking about the employee experience, maybe think about what relationships it generates between the manager and their employee, or the employee and their manager, and how we can maybe help everybody who's the victim sometimes of our systems to make better choices. And I think that's one of the exciting things we're seeing from maybe some of the employee listening platforms, but also the skills intelligence that's coming in to make recommendations, link people who have aspirations to mentors, etc., to jobs. That really releases the employee experience. And I think that's where maybe some of the traditional platforms that look around talent have failed a little bit in the past. They haven't been enabling enough. And that's a big change I think we're seeing across all of the CHR suites as well, being a bit more enablement focused, relationship focused, rather than processed dictating, if I can put it in that phrase.
Thanks, David. I think we've got time for maybe one more, or a couple more, but Fiona has asked a question about skills. So I'm going to come to you first, David.
That's a question.
In an organization, talking about skills tech, where the upskilling and reskilling is happening.
So I didn't catch the question.
Sorry, so a question from Fiona about skills, building on your skills taxonomy comments. Who owns skills? Is it learning where the upskilling and reskilling is happening?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? And to some extent, the question is also, is skills the right level of granularity? Does it need to be work? Do we need more work ontologies as much as we need skills ontologies? So I think we're still finding our way around what makes an effective organization. There's some interesting research from Deloitte from 2022, which highlighted the organizations that have gone down a skills-based route were 63% more likely to reach their financial goals. So there's some interesting sort of leaders that show this is adopted. Is that causation or correlation is difficult to know at this stage, but everybody seems to make the big skills bet. I think in terms of who owns skills, I don't think it's learning. I think it's probably more to do with strategic workforce planning and what organization you need for tomorrow to be successful. And I think that then trickles down to every other function, be that talent acquisition, be it employee mobility, maybe it's learning as well. You need to be business aligned, and the future of where the business needs to be successful is where you need to have insight. And I think some of the most exciting things that have been coming out from the software industry overall is the solutions that are able to support an understanding of what disruptions are coming to your business, how does that change the nature of work, and therefore what sort of people do you need to have work in your organization to almost become a North Star for this is how we need to develop the capability of our people. So it then trickles into upskilling and reskilling. So maybe sadly learning maybe one of the last people in the queue. I think you need to be much more upstream in terms of the business drivingness of it, the business embeddingness, and the perceived future value of skills in your organization. So that's where I'd put things anyway.
Sven, anything to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I think obviously learning has a stake in it, but it's not the only one. And owning, I mean, ultimately, the employee is owning their own skills and employability, right? So managers have a role to play, and obviously the different HR silos have a view from the different purposes that they are trying to fulfill on it. So I think it's definitely something where learning is maybe now realizing that there's a greater need for them to focus on upskilling and reskilling rather than distribution of learning content, which in the past maybe was a bit driving factor there, maybe a bit too much. But certainly from a TA perspective, talent acquisition definitely has been talking about it. There's also skill assessment tools out there that actually help you on a very granular level to assess the skills of a person, aside from CVs and all the experience that somebody has. So it's not it is not an easy kind of task to look beyond those, you know, classic patterns that you are looking at also as a manager, right? So from that perspective, I think every contribution, every focus on the subject from every silo within HR, but from the business overall, is an important one, because ultimately it provides fairer, better chances for people to, you know, stay employed or to get ready for the next level of work that they need to perform, right? Which might be something completely different than what they do today, because if you're a programmer nowadays, I mean, many people are really worried, right? So
yeah, might be. ChatGPT can do a lot of it, right? And that's the thing. So I think we have to be thinking about future focus and where that takes us. And I think the real challenge is at the point when you try and link it to learning, you need to understand level of skill, proficiency, complexity, situation, and lots of the skills profiling we're getting at the moment does not provide enough fidelity to make strong recommendations. And I think that's still, there's pieces of the puzzle that are still broken across all the experience to some extent as we're linked to skills.
Thank you, David. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for. So if you, moving on to talk about corporate membership a little bit. The research is just the start. We have our corporate membership program, which gives you inside access to more detailed research, benchmark reports, private corporate roundtables, and exclusive analyst time. Do scan the QR code just there to register your interest. Fosway's accelerated buying support can align stakeholders, validate solution strategy, shortlist vendor options, and accelerate and de-risk buying decisions as well. And also, we have a project that's in the pipeline now and going to be accelerating in 2025, which is a strategic research project around AI and HR talent and learning. It's a deep research project aiming to get beyond the hype and the noise. Obviously, there's plenty around AI, sort of interrogating the benefits that HR teams and vendors are realizing from embracing these innovations across the entire employee lifecycle. AI is growing exponentially, as we know. Large language models, co-pilots, AI agents, they're being introduced in all parts of the HR ecosystem. And so to become a core participant and gain access to the deeper research in this project and insights beyond what's being delivered in the public domain, do contact us at corporate@fosway.com. Couple more things. The 9 Grid for Cloud HR is out now. Go have a look at that. Next week, Unleash World is on, obviously, and our Fosway analysts will be there. So if you're attending, do go say hello. Do scan the QR code to take part in the HR reality survey, which is still open. Exclusive insights from that are going to be available next week at the Paris Convention Centre at Unleash World. And then, of course, there's the Knowledge Centre, which is launched quite recently. It's a collection of all Fosway research, all of our viewpoint papers, our 9 grids, our realities infographics, blog posts from previous clients, everything like that. You can find the trajectory guide, a bit more information about the 9 grid. You can search by category, topic, media type. The list never ends. It's all the analyst knowledge curated in one location, basically. So do have a look around. And that remains just for me to say thank you very much to David Perry and Sven Elbert for your time. And thank you, everyone, for attending as well. We will see you for another Ask the Analyst very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Sven.
Thanks, Sean. Bye. Have a good day.
Yeah, have a good one. Thanks, everyone. And the Knowledge Centre is really cool, honestly. It's so good.